Good evening. My name is Brendan Highland. I'm the principal here at NAI, or should I say I am the very proud principal at NAI. I'd like to welcome you to our Community Connections. Tonight's topic will obviously focus on transition to NAI. Let me be the first to tell you that we have obviously 3 middle schools coming together in one summer where we have over 1,300 kids coming into a class, and I would say most of the kids don't know each other. But I'm here to tell you, after about the 2nd or 3rd day of school, the kids do absolutely fantastic. They really do. There's a lot of work and a lot of preparation that goes into that, whether it's freshman orientation or kids having the ability, hopefully in the summer when if we don't have any construction projects, to walk around the building and just become comfortable with it. We feel as though we want a welcoming environment for our kids, and I think we are able to attain that. And programs like tonight help us do that. One of the things that I will tell kids when we meet on that first week of school, a couple things. One, make sure that you reach out to your teachers and begin to advocate for yourself. All right? We treat you like high school students. You're no longer in middle school. We treat you like young adults. We tell you and ask of you to do your very best at all times, to work hard, to give it all, and the academic rigor goes up significantly when you go from 8th grade to 9th grade. But it gets done, and it gets done well. And one of the things that we find when our kids come here, we actually survey the kids, and we ask them, what do you like most about NAI, and what do we need to change? And overwhelmingly, the kids say, I think it was like 74% of the kids said they absolutely love their teachers. It's their most favorite thing is their teachers that they have. And what else can you say? If you have a school where kids like their teachers, you're off to a pretty good start. We also tell them that we give them as much information as they can possibly handle to make good decisions. And that's what tonight is really about, is arming you with the information that you need to make those proper decisions. We all know that transitions can be a really difficult time in life, right? Whether it's transition, getting married or buying a house or getting a new job. Well, for kids going from 8th to 9th grade, it is a big transition. But when we provide you information, hopefully you take that information and make good decisions with it. And that's both parents and students. I'll leave you with this, parents. I promise you we will take good care of your kids. But there are 3 things that I want you to remember when you send your kid to us. Know that they're in good hands, but you need to find the right balance between being involved and being overly involved. Okay? 2, you need to be supportive. I guarantee you, your kids are going to make mistakes. They will make a mistake along the way. Hopefully, programs like tonight will help avoid some of those mistakes, but they are going to make mistakes, and be supportive. We always tell kids, and I have the unfortunate task of dealing with kids that make sometimes poor decisions. We don't judge kids by the mistakes that they make. We judge them by how they deal with the mistakes. I hope you'll do that too. And lastly, and most importantly, please don't necessarily worry about the final destination. Don't worry about that bumper sticker on the back of the window about where they're going to college. Make sure that your kids have the opportunity to enjoy going to school. You only get to go through high school once in life. You get hopefully 4 years, right, where you get to go through and really enjoy it. Make sure that we're not focusing on the grade point average. Make sure that we get our kids focusing on learning and what's important. Okay? So that would be my advice to parents, my one opportunity to get a little shout out to parents. But I'm going to turn the program over to Mr. Brinkley, who's our student assistance coordinator, and he is going to work you through the entire evening. And again, I'd like to welcome you to NAI, and I hope you enjoyed tonight's evening tonight. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. As Dr. Highland said, my name is Mr. Brinkley. I'm the student assistance coordinator here at NAI. The student assistance coordinator, I'm really in a really good spot because I get the opportunity to work with a lot of great people during the day. The thing that I'll attest to on a daily basis is the support system through starting with our principals, our counselors, our social workers, our school psychologists, everybody that supports your students here at NAI do a wonderful job. They also, our job is an easier spot because we have great teachers here too. And the great teachers and the things that they do on a daily basis for each of your students, I can attest in my opinion, and I know I have a biased opinion, that we really do have the best school in the school district. I think that we have a tough task with students transitioning from 8th grade up into high school, where now things, whereas a lot of things Dr. Highland mentioned with GPA and college and a lot of those things start to become into the forefront of all of your thinking, but we're going to be here to help support them, help encourage them, and help them to be great on a daily basis. And that's really what our plan is. And as Dr. Highland said, part of our process is to give you as much information as we possibly can. In giving you information, the thing that I want to give, the key part of it is not every single component of this program fits you today. But the thing that you don't know is you don't know when some of the different circumstances are going to change with your family or your students' lives or your friends, the friends of your students, when those things may change. So the more information you have, the better equipped you'll be, the more tools you have to be able to make your students have a very successful transition and a very successful time here at NAI, and then before you know it, we'll be sending them to Nash. So tonight's event this evening, we'll have a couple of different things going on. We'll start here. We have a presentation by Dr. Jackie Herring, talking about different stresses, different concerns, different things that will come up in a typical 9th grader's life. At that point, when she's done, we're going to have the students leave. We're going to have the students go over to our chorus room. We're going to give them a little bit of presentation there, allow them to ask some questions, get some different things in place for them, and then we're going to have other NAI students, or excuse me, current NAI students will be there, the students that welcomed you as you come in, that'll be giving the students tours. We'll be showing them the different things to try and eliminate any stress they have of where the cafeteria is, the gym is, library, all the main places within NAI, and allow them to have the opportunity to see where different things are, take them throughout the building, and get to see different things. And it'll be great, from our opinion, as they get to hear it firsthand from current NAI students that are going through the process that will be able to answer all the questions. After, while that's going on, there'll be a second presentation by Mrs. Deb Kehoe that we'll talk to just the parents, talking about any concerns and some warning signs of any drug and alcohol use. Then at the end of the program, we'll bring the students back in to you and be able to give you the opportunity to answer any questions that you may have. So at this time, pleasure, without talking about it, I talked to her beforehand that I was making sure I didn't steal any of her thunder and talk about any of the things she was going to talk about and give her too much of an introduction. But I introduce one of the people that we work with on a consistent basis, and as a part of my job and a part of the council's job is we reach out to the different community resources. And part of the community resources are therapists, psychologists, Deb with the Alliance, a bunch of different people that we tap into for their expertise, and we thought it would be great for you to hear from them this evening. For this time, I'd like to introduce Dr. Jackie Herring.
I wanted to thank Doug Brinkley, Mr. Brinkley, and Mr. Highland, Brian Piggins, and the administration, Ms. Maximo, for inviting us to come here. I say us because one of our social workers from our practice is also here, and she'll be with me to talk to some of the students during the break. I have been a psychologist for 22 years in the area. We have a practice in Mars, but I'm also a parent of 2 NA students. One is at Carson now in 7th grade, and one transitioned to NAI last year. So I do know some of the anxiety that the students are going through and the parents as well. We also, speaking, because this whole night is about transition, and we had an exchange student last academic year who transitioned from a small school in Spain to Nash. Pretty big transition that we helped her through. So I've seen a lot of transitions lately, particularly going to high schools. So what I wanted to talk tonight about was first about adolescence, because adolescence is a time of transition, and it is the time of transition when adolescents are experiencing more changes in this stage of life than any other time of their life. There are physical, cognitive, emotional, and psychological changes. So, each teenager is an individual with a unique personality and interests, likes and dislikes. However, there are a number of developmental issues that everyone faces in adolescence. So I'm just going to go through those quickly. I have a lot of slides, so sometimes I'm just going to ask you to go ahead and look at the slides while I talk, but I'm not going to say all of the information on the slides. And sometimes I'm going to be talking to the parents, and sometimes I'm going to be talking to the students. I'm just going to go back and forth. So, in adolescence, there is a move towards independence. There's a struggle with identity. There's a confusion as to who they are, what their place is in the world, and there's now a need for achievement and role experimentation. There's a change in their future interests, and there are cognitive changes that are going on in adolescence that you may have noticed in yourself as students and noticed as parents. They're mostly interested in the present. There's not as much of an interest in longer-term goals or what the consequences of certain things are, but their intellectual interests are expanding. There are differences in morals and values. Those are changing, and self-direction is changing as well. With rule and limit setting going on, or limit testing, I should say, there's now a capacity for abstract thinking. Early adolescents remain insecure throughout their emotional evolution, and I say that to both parents and students, to know that you're not alone in feeling like a lot of things are iffy and changing at this time. And now with all of these changes occurring, we're going to ask them to change in a big way and go to high school. So some of the fears about going to high school, to NAI specifically, Mr. Hyland mentioned some of them. First of all, you want to know who you are in this new environment. There's a change in curriculum that can be anxiety-provoking. There can be increased homework. You need to learn this new school very quickly to avoid getting into trouble, not getting places on time. And you have 3 middle schools coming together. So you have a larger number of students. You have expanded subject choices to include the electives that are now available. You have greater tiering of the classes, like academic and honors classes. So it is likely, and I saw this with my son, that you will be in some classes where you won't know very many people. In addition, there are four lunch periods at NAI, and 9th and 10th graders eat together. Now, I know in Carson, at least, that all the 6th graders eat together, all the 7th graders eat together, all the 8th graders eat together, no more. When you come here, all together. So there's only a 1 in 4 chance that you're going to eat with a particular friend of yours. And sometimes that, in and of itself, can be anxiety-provoking. Especially because this is such a time where friendships and social interactions are so important. The one thing that I have told kids about this kind of coming together is that you did these coming together kinds of things in elementary school as well. If you went to one of the larger elementary schools like McKnight or Marshall, there's a good likelihood that when you went from kindergarten to first grade to 2nd grade, that you didn't have a lot of kids from that previous year with you. They did that on purpose. So you were constantly coming together with new kids. If you was in some of the smaller schools where you had kids in the same classes from year to year, then you did have to go to the middle school where there were a lot of kids that you didn't know. So you've had this experience, you're just going to build on it more now. Okay, so start now to work with the transition like you were doing here. I want the parents to hear and the students to hear that it's important that you're held a little more accountable for remembering things now, this last 9 weeks. Hold yourself more accountable for remembering homework, for projects, and need fewer reminders from your parents. This transition means a change for both what the students are experiencing and also differences in how we parent. So consider giving your child more freedom within reason to make the choices about their clothes or their room decorations, their after-school schedules. It's a guide and don't control kind of style that you are developing as a parent. Consider if your child is behind or not at grade level in a core subject to get them some extra help at this point. Take into account your child's inborn temperament or personality as you're doing this. There are children who can't help but strive. There are others who are more laid back. There are some who are impulsive. The last thing you need to do with a tightly wired kid is to give them a chaotic environment. So for instance, if you have a perfectionistic, somewhat compulsive child who their grades mean a lot to them, to tell them over and over how much harder it's going to be in high school is to really wind them up. That may motivate somebody who's not doing their best in school and knowing that they have to step up. But for other personalities, it's going to make them more anxious. So you have to know your child in moving forward with those kinds of explanations. Okay, as we get closer to the school, they're going to want to know the rules, the bell schedule, the homework and attendance policies, the graduation requirements, know the layout of the school, and know that most kids here wear their backpack all day long. If you have the opportunity, go to the August orientation. I have to say that my son was a little nervous about coming here. And he went to the August orientation, which was organized chaos. I mean, there were all these kids in the halls, and they couldn't get to the tables necessarily. The clubs had tables in the organizations. But after that, with all that the staff here and the administration did with that day, and just coming together and people talking about their class sizes, calmed right down. He had really very little anxiety after that day. So I urge you to have them go to that. Know that your grade point averages are cumulative now. I know that Mrs. Jenkins likes to tell the kids at Carson during orientation that that's the time to make mistakes. And as Mr. Highland said, everybody's going to make mistakes in high school too. But now your grades are cumulative, starting in 9th grade. So you want to be aware of that and pay attention to that. Consider your study habits and think about it and see if you need to step them up a little bit or become a little more organized, and your parents can help you with that. I would encourage everyone to consider extracurricular activities, because this can alleviate some of the decline that kids are going to feel in classroom support, not having their friends in all of their classes, or potentially not having them at lunchtime. So if you know that you're going to an after-school activity or an organization or a sport, it can mitigate against that kind of anxiety. Then next year, I encourage the parents to go to open house and do your kid's schedule, and then imagine what it's like doing it with that heavy backpack. Meet the teachers, even though it might not be time to discuss an individual event or an individual issue with the child. You can get to introduce yourself, and then you can talk about that later and get to know the school counselors. When parents are involved in their child's high school experience, students have higher achievement. They're better adjusted, and they're much less likely to drop out. What research tells us, and we are trying to address in this presentation, is that after a transition, the perception of the quality of school, the quality of life at school goes down, regardless of how academically successful they are. That's what the research shows, and that's why we're doing programs like this. Transition has a negative effect on students' self-concept, and it reduces their self-esteem. And most students will experience a degree of anxiety and some depression during a transition period. Now, further research shows that how well students settle in to the new situation, and they actually do have an assessment instrument for settling in, those who perceive the transition period as stressful had a lower settle-in score. When students have a high level of extrinsic motivation, which means they're driven by grades and praise, they have a higher ability to settle in. If you've had a past experience of bullying, you may have a lower ability to settle in, and that's time to talk to parents or other adults to talk about that experience so we can get you to have a better experience in settling in. Declining classmate and teacher support is associated with a decrease in self-esteem and an increase in depression, and this is worse for boys. Decreases in classmate support is associated with an increase in social anxiety. And these are the issues that we're trying to help with in programs like today. So I wanted to talk a little bit about stress because teenage stress is one of the things that makes a child or a student settle in less than when they're less stressed. So there was a recent APA study, actually they do it about every year, and it showed that it showed that many American teens report experiencing stress at unhealthy levels. They experience symptoms of stress in numbers that mirror adults' experience, and they appear uncertain in how to address stress. So these are some of the stress symptoms that teenagers experience. They report higher levels during the school year. They believe the level of stress adversely affects how they are at school, at home, and if they go to work. The most common source of stress is school, and as a result, students believe that they get lower grades because of it. They have difficulty managing the balance in their lives. They neglect their home and work responsibilities. They may snap at their classmates and teammates, and they procrastinate. Teens are less aware than adults about how stress impacts their physical and mental health. So they're not as aware as adults that the long-term high stress can weaken immune systems, exhaust the body, and lead to inflammation and even more frequent colds. Teens don't know how to manage stress so well. Most engage in sedentary activities like video games, surfing the web, watching TV and movies. Those kids who engage in more physical activities, even walking or sports or some sort of recreational activity, report a lower stress level overall. Teens who exercise at least once a week or more frequently report lower average stress in the past month than those who exercise less than once a week or not at all. Teens who sleep more have less stress. Teens with high stress report spending more time online than those with low stress. Teens that report watching TV and movies more online or on a screen report a higher stress level than those who don't. So those are the key to reducing stress if you just want them in a nutshell. Get up, increase your activity, your standing up activity. Sleep more, decrease screen time, and learn some stress management techniques, which can be anything from relaxation techniques, yoga techniques, anything like that can help with stress. Now, the APA report also had some interesting findings about stress in girls and boys, and so I wanted to focus a little bit, split you up in terms of what it's like for girls and what it's like for boys. Teen girls report a higher level of stress than boys. And that sounds like a simple statement, but we're not sure quite what that means because it's reported by girls, and I'm going to go into this more as I talk about the boys. It may be that girls actually experience more stress than boys. It may be that they're more insightful about recognizing stress, but the felt stress is the same. Or it may be that girls are more comfortable reporting stress. Okay, so one way or another, girls are saying more stressed. They're more stressed. 37% of teen girls versus 23% of teen boys report some depressive symptoms. That's in the past month. Teen girls report more difficulty managing stress than boys. Teen girls, more than boys, report symptoms and unhealthy behaviors as a result of stress. Teen girls report more appetite and dietary changes due to stress, and that continues to adulthood. So stress affects teen girls' relationship with food much more than boys. Girls report feeling more social pressure than boys. Well over 50% of both boys and girls report some aspect of their physical appearance is a source of stress. And girls are more affected by how they are perceived on social media as a source of stress than boys. Body image is a source of stress for girls. No, the pubescent body betrays. Many girls look ungainly for a while in adolescence, and this will change. Know that. It will change. Crash dieting almost always creates a problem. So, it's important for us as parents to discuss the changing body, the body in transition, but the teen needs to be empowered to take control and have power and responsibility for her own nutrition. Again, encourage sports and physical activity, but it doesn't need to be competitive. Now, the next couple of slides that I'm going to show you, the APA study was talking about girls, but I think a lot of it does apply to boys, but I'm going to get to boys in a minute in terms of the specifics. But know that friendships are a safe haven for an adolescent. The need to be liked is paramount for a lot of kids, and the peer group has a lot of influence. So the right friendships, especially if they are long-term, can minimize vulnerability to some temptations. So youth groups, church groups, other organized groups can offer additional support, especially if your girls are shy, if they have some disabilities, so they have difficulty getting together. But part of growing up is choosing one's own friends. And the more parents try to do that for her, the more she may rebel. Overuse of the computer, again, poses an obstacle to developing peer relationships. So, invite the friends over. Get to know the friends. Parents, get to know the friends. If you think her friends could lead her into danger, voice your concerns about her safety. Do that firmly and clearly so you can protect her. But forbidding her from seeing her friends probably won't work. There are mood swings in adolescence. Most swing between happy and sad from one day to the next. And adolescents have not quite developed a full perspective on how their experiences fit into the greater scheme of things. So a bad grade can mean, oh, the world. A fight with a friend, oh, the world. So there isn't quite the perspective that you can present as parents to her about these ups and downs. So, listen and share the joys, and if she's anxious or sad, help her to identify the problems and get some perspective on them. Stay calm as parents. Let her know that frequent ups and downs are normal during adolescence and stress is a part of life. You can often problem solve with her during these times, and sometimes not so much. Okay, in adolescence you have both rebellion and risk-taking. There's a difference. Rebellion is you're moving away from the parents. So, a healthy rebellion is a keep-out sign, or purple hair. But it's a myth that teens must fight their parents to the limit in order to reach adulthood successfully. So be careful not to label a healthy push for independence as bad. A teenager who doesn't rebel at all may be afraid to grow up or may think she doesn't have a safety net in case she falls. She thinks she has to protect you too much. Extreme rebellion, which is rare, can often be traced back to some overly permissive or overly controlling kind of parenting. So set reasonable and age-appropriate limits and provide predictable expectations and consequences. Now, with risk-taking, which is moving away from the parents, risk-taking is about moving towards something, but not always thinking about all the consequences of the move. So healthy risk-taking can be running for a school office, applying for a job, striking out with new friends and leaving the old friends behind. But dangerous risk-taking, of course, is drinking and driving recklessly, smoking, premarital sex. So we want to encourage positive risk-taking because risk-taking is a part of adolescence. Establish a pattern, though, of knowing and asking where she is and who she's with. which leads us to setting limits. Limits need to stick. So make the consequences fit the behavior when she acts out, as opposed to some outrageous kind of limit. Don't wait for the crisis to put them into place, because when there's a crisis, you tend more to exaggerate the limits, and then people don't stick to the limits. Girls are more vulnerable than boys in many situations. This was an interesting example. I've been talking a lot to people, parents, about transitions, their own transition if they remember, which I don't, or their kids' transition if they're older. And I was talking to a friend who has older children, and they went to a different school district, a nice, a really good school district to the south, but they have a 9 to 12 high school. And for their transition talk, they brought a police officer in to talk to the parents. And one of the things she said, the thing that stuck out in her mind, was that the police officer said, do not let your freshman girls go to upper class parties, because they're preyed on. So we have 9 and 10 here, 11 and 12 at Nash. It's more divided, which is a good thing, I think, for many reasons. Younger adolescent girls should be supervised in settings where any behavior you disapprove of can happen. And it's good to set up a network of parents who will cooperate with you in monitoring those things and set appropriate curfews. For girls, the relationship with dad is really important. It's so good to see so many dads here. His relationship with her is associated with a girl's work success, her occupational competency, her sense of comfort, and her mastery of the world around her. So it's important that dad's around. That's how she learns power relationship with males and females. And dad should focus on what's going on the inside, not what's going on the outside. For girls where there isn't a dad in the picture, we have lots of role models, lots of people who can step in, teachers, coaches, so seek those out as well. Okay, so let's go to boys now. Researchers have found that at birth and from several months afterwards, male infants are actually more emotionally expressive than female babies. But by the time a boy reaches elementary school, much of the emotional expressiveness has been lost and gone underground. Boys at 5 or 6 become less likely than girls to express hurt or distress, either to their teachers or their parents. So, what makes a boy who was once open and exuberant unwilling to show that whole range of emotions? Well, recent research points to 2 primary causes. The first is the use of shame. We use shame, unfortunately, in the toughening up process, by which we think that boys need to be raised. So little boys are made to feel ashamed of their feelings and guilty, especially about feelings of weakness, vulnerability, and despair. The second reason is the separation process as it applies to boys. The emphasis our society places on boys separating emotionally from his parents, particularly mom, at an unnecessarily early age, which is usually at 6 and again at adolescence. So 6 when they go to elementary school, and in adolescence when they're coming here. So many boys live behind a mask of masculine bravado, and they think they need to handle their problems alone. And remember what I said earlier about boys perceiving a decline in classmate and teacher support? It may be part of this whole process, that there isn't actually less support necessarily there, but their belief that they have to go it alone impacts that. So on the outside, you have a boy who's having problems. He may seem cheerful and resilient while keeping inside the feelings that don't fit this male model. The problem is, we don't see that until the boy goes over the edge, as we call it, and gets into trouble or starts fights, takes drugs, abuses alcohol, they're diagnosed with some clinical depression. So Bill Pollack, who's a clinical psychology at Harvard, has done a lot of research on boys, and he calls this the boy code. That's what we teach boys all over the place. We teach them at school, we teach them in sports, we teach them in the sandbox. These are the 4 basic stereotype male ideals that go with the boy code. The effect of the boy code is that even when a boy appears sad or afraid, our culture lets them know in no uncertain terms that they better toughen up. Toughen up. The same kind of shame that silences adolescent girls from expressing their true voice affects boys at a much younger age. So boys are falling behind. Over the last decade, we've been forced to confront some staggering statistics. From elementary grades through high school, boys receive lower grades than girls. 8th grade boys are held back 50% more often than girls. Fewer boys than girls now attend graduate school. When 8th grade students are asked about their futures, girls are now twice as likely as boys to say they want to pursue a career in management, the professions, or business. Boys experience more difficulty adjusting to school. They have 71% of the school suspensions. So girls are making great strides in math and science, and boys are lagging behind. Boys brag more, but they're not doing more, or they're not doing better. So what to do? Become sensitive to the mask. Learn a new way to talk to boys. Use less intimidating language. Use open-ended question. What's going on? Can you tell me? I've noticed things seem a little different for you lately. Let's talk about it. Give your son your undivided attention. Sometimes they're not going to want to talk, and I'm going to show you a couple slides from that. But show the attention so that they know you're available. Encourage the full range of emotions with your boys. Before I get to that one, avoid the teasing and the shaming. Research as well as everyday observation reveals that parents often, although unintentionally, use shaming language with their male children that they don't use with their girls. It's natural to want to be playful, but it's hindering them. Another step is the connection through action. So boys are less likely to sit down and want to chat. So if you can connect with them in a sport or a musical instrument, if you can do something and start to talk, that can help. Learn their emotional schedule. Again, what I said earlier was they may not want to talk right away. It may take them a while. Learn how long it takes, what their emotional schedule is like. They have a timed silence syndrome. That they may need to be silent and then use time later when you're available to talk about it. So if you have girls and boys, they're going to be different in how they sit down and talk to you, okay? And then finally, create a model of masculinity that's broad and inclusive for them. Try to get rid of the messages of being a guy and expand the model of masculinity. Okay. So, these are some of the things that are going on, the stress that the kids are feeling. I also wanted to take the time to go into some of the mental health issues that adolescents are experiencing at this age, because research shows that half of all lifetime cases of mental illness begin by age 14. And that's why we want to talk about it now. Mental disorders are diagnosable conditions characterized by changes in thinking, in mood, and behavior, or some combination of those. They cause a person to feel so stressed out, and they will impair his or her ability to function. That's the characteristic. The length of time, the severity, and the impairment in functioning are the key characteristics of any kind of mental disorder. And they're fairly common in adolescence. So as with physical symptoms, symptoms of mental illness occur on a spectrum from mild to severe, just as with physical health. However, when psychological symptoms cause major emotional distress or interfere substantially with daily life or social interactions over a period of time, you may need professional evaluation. Okay, so I want to go through, and I'll pick them up here on that. Here are the percentages of adolescents with diagnosable disorders. Okay, so anxiety disorders, one of the most common. Anxiety can be a normal reaction to stress, but again, if it's intense, if it's disabling, if it's interfering, then you have a problem. And it could be a diagnosable disorder. You may want to seek out some help. So examples of anxiety disorders are post-traumatic stress disorder, social phobia, generalized anxiety disorder. Obsessive-compulsive disorder is no longer categorized as an anxiety disorder, but because it has its own category nowadays, but it's characterized by a great deal of anxiety. Okay, here are some of the symptoms of all kinds of anxiety. Most anxiety, or all of the anxiety symptoms, have these kinds of symptoms in them. I'll go through quickly. Okay, so generalized anxiety disorder is when a young person worries about a range of issues. Well, or a person, an older person, it's a range of issues. So if they're worried about, one day they're worried about friendships, the next week they're worried about grades, the next week they're worried about their sports, but it seems like they're always worried about something, and it becomes disabling. That's characteristic of generalized anxiety disorder. And it switches, it moves around, generalized anxiety disorder. When I see adults who have a diagnosis of generalized anxiety disorder, they say they were the worriers of the family. With social anxiety, that produces an extreme fear of being humiliated or embarrassed in front of other people. It's much more than shyness. It affects older children and teenagers a lot, and it can produce uncontrollable, extreme, and negative reactions to social situations. So a young person with this disorder may experience extreme fear at the thought of using a public restroom, speaking in public, eating in a restaurant, dating, anything that has to do with a social environment. They often believe that they are going to do or say something stupid, and they're going to be humiliated. Post-traumatic stress disorder is when there has been a stressful or traumatic event involving a situation where someone's life has been threatened or there's been a severe injury. In order for the diagnosis of most anxiety disorders, you need to have the symptoms, and they need to be pretty much unremitting for about 6 months or more. So again, we're talking about something that's been debilitating for a long time. With panic disorder, that often occurs during adolescence, though it may start in childhood. It's characterized by panic attacks that cause a dramatic physical change like chest pains and heart palpitations. Everybody's had a panic attack. You lock your keys in your car. You're like, okay, that you know what the panic is about. When somebody has a panic disorder, they don't know what has triggered the panic attack to occur. And then obsessive compulsive disorder, put this in here because one of the things I threw a lot, involves obsessions, which obsessions drive anxiety up. So they raise anxiety, the fear of germs, the fear of contamination, doing something harmful. And then in order to alleviate the anxiety or to bring the anxiety down, somebody will engage in compulsions, which is a behavioral act to drive the anxiety down. It's like a ritual, like washing their hands, checking a lot. So there is help for anxiety. It's one of the things that we can treat quite well in psychotherapy. Different kinds of ways to treat anxiety disorders. Okay, parent involvement is key in getting your kids help, but know this, that once your child reaches the age of 14, they hold the privilege of confidentiality. So sometimes parents will get upset with us because we're not allowed to talk to them, and that is because the child holds that privilege and has said no talking. These are some of the things you can do, however, along with asking and being a part of the treatment that you can. I'm going to move on to depression because it's also very common. It's probably the most common in teens. It's not just bad moods and occasional melancholy. It's a serious problem that impacts every day of teens' life. These are the symptoms of depression. Again, it's about how long. So depression, in order to be diagnosed, has to have a majority of symptoms, and they have to be there for at least 2 weeks, either every day or most of every day. And again, it needs to be on the debilitating side. Now, one of the issues with depression is that in teenagers, it looks a little different than it does with adults. So you can see where adults will often feel sad and withdraw, teens can often look irritable and complain. So the effects of depression. It can be very damaging if it's left untreated. Find a treater when you're looking for a treatment specialist. If they have anxiety, depression, it's like, I get to my eating disorder and ADD information, but ask that your treater knows how to treat young people with these issues. And I'm going to make, because there are different avenues for treatment, from psychotherapy and counseling, parent training, and medication, I'm going to make a push for people to consider, if they're going to put their kids on psychiatric medications, to go to a psychiatric professional, a doctor of psychiatry. And that is because a lot of medications are prescribed by pediatricians and primary care physicians. I realize that. But know that if you would get a psychiatric consultation, it brings a little more to the table. Psychiatrists are versed in the entire range of psychiatric medications, and that may not be the case with pediatricians and primary care. They may not have been schooled in the full range. Second, a psychiatrist or a doctor that has psychiatric background will take the person up to a full therapeutic dose. When I talk to my friends at Western Psych, one of the things that they tell me is that people are not high enough on the dosage. Instead, they get switched around. And psychiatrists are not afraid, or they know how to measure that and can get people on a therapeutic dose. They can also get people off of medications. And again, primary care and pediatricians are not schooled in how well to get people off. And they think, well, you're doing well, so we'll just stay on it. These kind of medications were not intended for life. None of them were studied for life. Unfortunately, when you're coming off of the medications, they often have a rebound effect. And the rebound effect means that you can experience the symptoms like you were having a depressive episode, like you were having your anxiety back, and it's actually a side effect of coming off of the medication. If you know that and you can wait out the side effects, then you can come off the medication. You want to do this, of course, under the doctor's care. And the fourth reason that you may want to consider a psychiatrist for your kids is the child's brain is continually developing all through adolescence. And there may need to be dosing changes more rapidly with a child and an adolescent than there is with an adult. And you want somebody to monitor that more closely. So that's my push for my psychiatric brethren. I'm coming to the end of my time. I did want to talk a little about eating disorders and attention deficit. So if at the end of the presentation, Deb's presentation, and after the closing, if you want to talk about either one of those, or actually you want to talk about anything, I'll be here. This is my colleague Heidi Christie, the clinical social worker in our practice. She'll be here also to answer questions if you have any. So I appreciate your time, so we can get everything.
At this time, I should probably introduce myself. My name is Jeff Longo. I'm the Student Assistance Coordinator. I work at the senior high school. So a couple more years from now, I'll have the pleasure of doing whatever I can to support your children. But for right now, I'm here to direct the students that are here tonight to as quickly but safely as possible, just kind of exit through the back. Mr. Brinkley will be shuttling you down to the choral room. But in the meantime, as Doug had mentioned earlier, we have another presenter to speak to you tonight. And this is a difficult subject, but I think it's a very, well, I know it's a very important subject for us to be on top of. And so there's a lot of really good information, so I don't want to hold up any further. It is my pleasure to introduce to you Ms. Debbie Kehoe, who is the Executive Director for the Alliance for Safe and Drug-Free Children. And so please help me welcome her.
Well, good evening, everybody. And like Mr. Longo said, this really is a difficult subject. We all want to think that it's never going to impact us or our children or anybody in our family. But if you were to survey the kids, every one of them would raise their hand and say that they know somebody who does something. You know, in their neighborhood, in their school, in their church. We all know somebody. Drug use is rampant across every school, every community, and it doesn't discriminate. And so what I hope to be able to do tonight is to give you some information to educate you on what you need to know about the current trends, what we are seeing and what is going on, because just as Dr. Herring said, that, you know, kids now have an opportunity to make a lot of choices. What they have to realize is that with the choices that they make, what are the risks that they're willing to take, right? And there's some significant ones. So what we're going to do is we're going to start with just some common risk factors before we go into some detail on what we're seeing with the drugs. The 5 common risk factors that potentially can lead teens to alcohol and drug use: individual, community, peer, school, and family. The risk factors for individual: begin drinking or using drugs at an early age, anywhere from 10 to 12 years of age. And let me tell you that we do have kids in treatment that young. All right, so unfortunately, that's what we're seeing more of. Teens thinking that drinking and drug use isn't that harmful. We're going to talk about that. Attention deficit hyperactivity or impulse control, mental health disorders such as depression, anxiety, and conduct disorders. That would be considered self-medicating. All right, when you have a mental health issue and you want to numb the pain. Rebellious, frequent breaking of rules. Here are risk factors. Rebellious, friends who use drugs or drink, friends with favorable attitudes towards drugs and alcohol, friends who think drinking and drug use isn't that harmful or begin using it at an early age as well. Family risk factors. Family history of addiction, trauma to divorce, death of a family member, child abuse. Once again, we can go through the mental health gambit on those. Little or no parental attachment, communication, supervision. And when I say that, I want you to know that I have worked with a lot of families who say, you know, he was always so good. I don't know what happened. Well, good kids can make bad choices, and when they have no supervision, and we know that the most significant hours of the day are between the hours of 3 and 5. When a child is alone during those hours, they potentially can make bad decisions. Unclear or lack of expectation, inconsistent or severe punishment. School risk factors. Academic difficulties, academic pressures. Once again, that would be considered self-medicating. Slipping grades, not turning in homework, skipping school, or a lack of commitment to school, not feeling a connection. And sometimes those kids that don't feel connection, they'll reach out to other kids that don't have a connection, and they'll find something in common. Kids who use drugs find other friends who use drugs. Community risk factors. Easily available alcohol and drugs in the community, community laws and attitudes towards drug and alcohol use, and we will go into that. Media glamorization or portrayal of drinking and drug use without consequences. And I just saw this last week, and I just have to talk about it briefly. we were going through the stations. Has anybody ever seen CBS Two Broke Girls? Anybody seen this? Well, last week, and it just was weird because we stopped on that station, and these two girls were talking about they're getting ready for some big event, and they're working in a restaurant, and the one girl says to her friend, "What's wrong with you? You're not high. You're always high. You need to go get yourself a joint." So she goes in the kitchen, she talks to the cook, "Hey, I need a joint, I need to smoke some weed." This is what we're talking about. These are the kinds of things that our kids see, and it glamorizes it, and they don't think there's a problem with it. So, what do you need to know? So let's go through these real quick. We're going to start with alcohol. And today's teens drinking and drugs, by the time most teens reach late adolescence, they've drank alcohol, or they've abused an illicit substance, or they've taken a drug that they shouldn't have over the counter or prescribed to somebody else. 78% of U.S. teens have drank alcohol, 81% have the ability to use illicit substances, while 42% actually tried them. Now, the median age for alcohol and drug abuse is 14, but I do believe that has lowered in recent years. That's more like 11, 12. The average age of first marijuana use, 14, and alcohol as young as 12. Move that down, 10 and 12. 10 for alcohol, 12 for marijuana. And out of the estimated 20 million alcoholics in America, more than half began drinking as teenagers. This is what you really need to know too. That we know that 99.9% of all of the parties that these kids attend, hey, it's just beer? No. There's always other chemicals and substances that are present. There are no such thing as beer parties anymore. And the concern is that when you've been drinking, you are less inhibited and you are more inclined to trying things. All right, so it's really important. And the other thing, and I'm going to stick it in here, right here, is that when we know, we need to teach our kids about being responsible reporters. That doesn't mean that they're snitches or they're tattletales, that, that they can come to you or trusted adults or come to the school and to a counselor and talk about a concern that they have. But when we know that the person down the street is taking the keys of the kids so that they can have their prom party and there's beer going to be there, there's more than beer there, all right? And we have a duty to call the authorities on that. And I hope that you'll keep that in mind. More than half of all new illicit drug users begins with marijuana. Take a look at this chart, over 65.6, all right? This is where it starts. Well, actually, alcohol is a drug. People don't necessarily consider it that, all right? But if you're looking beyond alcohol at an illicit substance, this is where it starts. Here's the blunt truth. Today's marijuana isn't the same as the 1970s, all right? Everybody thinks, well, it's just marijuana, we smoked it in the 70s, but it's a huge difference today, all right? The TSH, which is the component in marijuana that makes you high. Back in the 1970s, it was about 1%. Take a look at how it has escalated over the years. Right now, we're looking at a TSH level at average 20%, and with edibles, it's even higher than that. All right? What does that mean? That's like drinking a 12-ounce glass of beer versus a 12-ounce glass of 80-proof vodka. That's the difference with the marijuana today. It is not the same drug as it was. And it is addictive. It is still considered a Class 1, Schedule I drug with the federal law. And I just scratch my head. I don't quite understand how states can allow that when it is a federal offense. But the White House Office of National Drug Control Policy has determined that 1 in 11 people who have ever used marijuana are going to become dependent upon it. But that statistic changes to 1 out of 6 when smoking marijuana begins as an adolescent. And I'm not saying that everybody who smokes marijuana is going to go on to other things, but talk to any addict, a heroin addict, and they'll all tell you that they began with marijuana. So it's not that it's going to happen, but it has the potential. We also have recently new research out that IQ levels can be dropped as much as 9 points. It contributes to rates of depression and suicide thoughts and/or attempts. It reduces motivation, school performance, the greater chance of school dropouts. So these are all the things that we know, and I worked in a school a long time with Mr. Longo, Mr. Brinkley, that we know when kids start using drugs, we know. We see the change in them, we see the behavior issues, and we know the decline, and if there's not any help. And unfortunately, as time goes on, those drugs are even harder. All right? It's even more difficult to get the kids off of them. So the key is to stop it before it starts. So the blunt truth, marijuana is not safe. And what you need to know is there's two kinds of impairment. There's the mental and the physical impairment. You know, people don't realize sometimes, we all know when somebody's drunk. You know, they have the physical symptoms of it. But we don't always necessarily know when somebody is under the influence of marijuana, which becomes a real problem when it comes to getting in a car with somebody who's been smoking, who is high, because it impacts their coordination, it impacts their ability to, their cognitive skills, their judgment, their reflexes. And we're finding this more and more in states such as Colorado, which we'll talk about a little bit shortly here. The other thing that you need to know is that we have, they have been watching over the course of time since 1993 that with the increased perception of risk, with the decreased perception of risk, there's an increased use. And that's what we're finding today because we have states that have legalized it and it's glamorized on television and, you know, and musicians and so on and so forth. And so it's no big deal, you know? Hey, it's just pot, it's legalized, it's no big deal. And so all the more reason why our kids are trying it at a younger age, because the fact that it's legalized, why not? You know, it's safe to do. If other people can do it, they're doing it at a much younger age. So that brings us to what have we learned from the state of Colorado? As you can see from this, Colorado has been providing medical marijuana since 2000 and passed a law for recreational marijuana a couple years ago. So we have learned some lessons from Colorado. So I'm going to pose one question to you. What percentage, and I'd really like a show of hands on this, what percentage of Colorado cities have now banned the sale of recreational marijuana? What do you think that is? How many of you think that that would be A, 16%? Or B, 84%? Or C, 40%? It's 84%. Right now, of the 31 cities in Colorado that voted in November to allow the recreational sale of marijuana, 26 of them currently have banned it. So if 26 of them have banned it, then obviously isn't working too well, is it? And they have some serious problems with it. Which brings us to marijuana edibles. You need to know about these because these came across from New Jersey. I don't know how they came from New Jersey, but they did this past fall. I don't believe that we have seen any of them in this area, but you need to know how dangerous these are. Marijuana edibles, they can have up to 70% of THC. There's no way of being able to monitor those levels. They're inconsistent with the packaging. And here's an example of one of them. This is Claude. He's a black cherry gummy bear, and he's THC infused. In Colorado law, 10 milligrams of THC is per serving. A serving here is 1 foot. Now take a look. There's the bear, and there's a dime, and the dime is the size of a foot. What's happening, especially in Colorado, because they have edibles all over the place, what's happening is that because marijuana, when you eat it, it's fat soluble. It takes longer for you to feel the effects. So you bite the foot, and you don't feel anything. So then you bite the other foot, and before you know it, you have consumed an amazing amount of THC, which is causing all kinds of psychotic episodes of what we're learning. Another serious problem that we have across the area is prescription drug abuse. And prescription drug abuse has really become more and more of a concern. Ever since OxyContin came onto the market, OxyContin is an opiate. OxyContin was first designed for terminally ill cancer patients. And we know that many kids think that prescription drugs are safer to abuse than illegal substances because they're prescribed by a doctor. More than 2,000 teens begin abusing prescription drugs each day, and after marijuana, it's the most common drugs that teens are using are prescription medications. More than 70% of people 12 and older who abuse prescription drugs say that they get them from a friend or a relative, or they get them from a grandparent, or they get them from an open house. We're finding that out. You know, can I borrow your bathroom? They go in there and scour the medicine cabinet. The most commonly abused drugs: sleeping pills, anti-anxiety, younger brother and sister's attention deficit medications, stimulants. As many as 1 in every 5 teens in America say they have taken a prescription drug that was not prescribed for them. And we know, the kids know, the peers who've had oral surgery, they know that when they come back, they've gotten a prescription of Percocets, and they're willing to pay for them. So you need to be on guard about that. Prescription drugs are a very serious concern. And this is the reason why they're the pathway to heroin. It's increasingly becoming prevalent at parties of students, both inner city, but also in the suburbs. And it's not so much that we're seeing the heroin in school, but when kids start using drugs in school and then they move on to prescription drugs, generally we're finding the overdose issues are somewhere in the mid-20s. But if they're doing heroin in the mid-20s, that means that they were doing other stuff when they were still in school. Why is that a pathway to heroin? Well, marijuana. Marijuana comes in at about $12 for a bag. A Vicodin pill. Vicodin is the most common, most prescribed medication in this country. Sells for $10 a pill. OxyContin. OxyContin goes on the market for $1 a milligram. An 80 milligram tablet of OxyContin is $80, which is equivalent to 16 Percocets. That's how strong that is. And if OxyContin becomes too expensive for you, heroin is $10 a bag. And this is the reason why we are seeing a jump and a huge increase in heroin use, because heroin can be smoked and snorted. It is so pure. It's not like the kind that had to be cooked on a spoon, and it doesn't need to do that anymore. All right. But eventually it will be injected. So what can you do as a parent? And once again, we go back over these. We basically have covered these about staying involved, setting positive expectations, listen. Listen to what they're telling you. Listen to look at what they're writing on their notebooks. Look at what they're writing on their papers. If you don't understand something, call the school. Ask the counselors, what does this mean? I don't understand it. Last year, at the beginning of the year, we had an issue with Molly. You know, hey, you know, kids were talking back and forth about Molly. Well, Molly was pure ecstasy. And these kids from around the area were doing it. And the parents didn't know what that meant. And they saw this written on, I saw these text messages. All right, so if you don't understand something or something just doesn't sound right, look into it. Role model, responsible behavior, social and problem-solving skills, establish and enforce no-tolerance rule. We know for a fact that the more that you send the message that it will not be tolerated behavior, the greater the possibility or probability that they won't do it. So it's important to start that conversation now. If you have not already, we work with parents of 5th grade students. That's how young we begin. We've already talked with parents of much younger kids because we can't teach you soon enough. We hope to teach you what you need to know before you need to know it, before it gets out of hand. You've heard these before about eating meals, taking advantage of teachable moments, and certainly know your teen's friends, and know your teen's friends' parents. Where are your kids going after school? Who are they hanging out with? Is there adult supervision? And the other thing that isn't up there that I would say to you is that I really have an issue with sleepovers. I think sleepovers are very dangerous. Monitor and secure the household alcohol supply. Lock up prescription medications. Please make sure that you lock them up. And also any relatives. Not necessarily because your kids are going to use them, but boy, you can make some money off of these pills. Know the passwords to all of your teen's social media accounts. Be friends with your kids on social media. Understand, not just for drug and alcohol issues, but for many other issues as well. As far as bullying, social concerns. You need to know what your kids are saying to who and what others are saying back to your children. And always trust your gut. There's nobody who knows your kids better than you do. And if something seems out of whack, there's adolescent behavior. We all know about those things. But when something is consistently declining and you don't understand it, trust your gut and get help. Stay informed. Once again, you have an amazing school. North Allegheny, I raised my children here. And your counselors are all well informed. They can reach out to you. They can help you. But in addition to that, there's also our online website. We have a complete series of online videos with talking points. Watch with your kids. Continue the conversation. There's all kinds of there's programs. There's keeping kids safe and drug-free, signs and symptoms. I didn't put them up here, but anything and everything, the most critical questions that we've heard from parents, the signs and symptoms of potential drug use, all those kinds of things you can find on our website. We have cards in the back there with our website address on there, but also a toll-free number that comes directly to me. If I can ever be of any help to you, please feel free to let me know.
you.